Hello everybody and welcome back to Frost BV Tubing. I am Frost. Frost Silver Snow. In case you were wondering, just a little bit of a hint, nudge to what's coming in the future, by giving you my last name. We are going to be continuing to read Court of Thrones and Roses today. I think I might do another 3 chapters, just because I didn't do anything last week with this book. Yeah. So let's get into it. Every step towards the line of trees was too swift, too light, too carrying me to whatever torment and misery awaited. I didn't dare look back at the cottage. We entered the line of trees. Darkness beckoned beyond, but a white mare was patiently waiting, unbound, beside a tree, her coat like fresh snow in the moonlight. She only lowered her head, as if in respect of all things, as the beast lumbered up to her. He motioned with a great giant paw for me to mount. Still the horse remained calm, even as he passed close enough to gut her with one swipe. It had been years since I'd ridden, and I'd only ridden a pony at that. But I'd savored the warmth of the horse against my half-frozen body as I climbed up into the saddle, and she set into a walk. Without light to guide me, I let her trail the beast. They were nearly the same size. I wasn't surprised when we headed northward toward fairy territory, though my stomach clenched so tightly it ached. I lived with him. I could live out the rest of my mortal life on his lands. Perhaps this was merciful, but then he hadn't specified in what manner exactly I would live. The treaty forbade fairies from taking us as slaves, but perhaps that excluded humans who had murdered fairies. We'd likely go to whatever rift in the wall he used to get here to steal me. And once we went through the invisible wall, once we were in Pyrian, there was no way for my family to ever find me. I'd be a little more than a lamb in the kingdom of wolves. Wolf. Murdered a fae. That's what I'd done. My throat went dry. I'd killed a fairy. I couldn't even bring myself to feel badly about it. Not with my family left behind me to surely starve. Not when it meant one less wicked, awful creature in the world. The beast had burned my ash arrow, so I'd have to rely on luck to even get a splinter of wood again, if I was ever to stand a chance of killing him, or slowing him down. Knowledge of that weakness, of their susceptibility to ash, was the only reason we'd ever survived the High Fae during the ancient uprising. A secret betrayed by one of their own. My blood chilled further as I uselessly scanned for any signs of the narrow trunk, an explosion of branches that I'd learned to mark as marked ash trees. I'd never seen the forest so still. Whatever was out there had to be tame compared to the beast beside me. Despite the horse's ease around him, hopefully he would keep other fairies away when we entered his realm. Prythian. The word was a dead knell that echoed through me again and again. Lands. He said he'd had lands. But what kind of dwelling? My horse was beautiful, and its saddle was crafted of rich leather, which meant he had some sort of contact with civilized life. But I'd never heard of the specifics of what the lands of fairies or the High Fae were like. Never heard much of anything other than their deadly abilities and appetites. I clenched the reins to keep my hands from shaking. There were a few first-hand accounts of Prythian. Hand accounts of Prythian itself. The mortals who went over the wall were either willingly as tributes from the children of the blessed or stolen, never came back. I'd learned most of the legends from the villagers, though my father had occasionally offered up a milder tale or two on the nights that he had made an attempt to remember we existed. As far as we knew, High Fae still governed the northern parts of our world, from our enormous island over the narrow sea, separating us from the massive continent across the depthless fjords, unfrozen wastelands, and sand-blasted deserts, all the way to the great ocean on the other side. Some fairy territories were empires. Some were overseen by kings and queens. Then there were places like Prythian, divided and ruled by 7 high lords. Beings of such unyielding power that legend claimed they could level buildings, break apart armies, butcher you before you even could blink. I didn't doubt it. No one had ever told me why humans chose to linger in our territory when so little space had been granted us, and we remained in such close proximity to the Prythian. Fools, whatever humans stayed there after the war must have been suicidal fools to live so close. Even with the centuries-old treaty between the mortal and the Fey realms, there were rifts in the warded wall separating our lands, holes big enough for those lethal creatures to slip into our territory and amuse themselves with tormenting us. That was the side of the Prythian that the children of the blessed never deigned to acknowledge. Perhaps a side of Prythian I'd soon witness. My stomach turned. Live with him, I reminded myself, again and again and again. Live, not die. Though I suppose I could also live in a dungeon. He would likely lock me up and soon forget I was there. Forget that humans needed things like food and water and warmth. Prowling ahead of me, the beast's horn spiraled toward the night sky, and tendrils of hot breath curled from his snout. We had to make camp at some point. The border of Prythian was days away. Once we stopped, I would keep awake for the entirety of the night and never let him out of my sight. Even though he burned my ash arrow, I smuggled my remaining knife in my cloak. Maybe tonight would grant me an opportunity to use it. But it was not my own doom that I contemplated as I let myself tumble into dread and rage and despair. As we rode on, the only sounds of snow crunching beneath paws and hooves, I alternated between wretched smugness at the thought of my family starving and thus realizing how important I was, and blinding agony at the thought of my father begging in the streets, his ruined leg giving out on him as he stumbled from person to person. Every time I looked at the beast, I could see my father limping through the town, pleading for coppers to keep my sisters alive. Worst, what Nesta might resort to in order to keep Elaine alive. She wouldn't mind my father's death, but she would lie and steal and sell anything for Elaine's sake, and her own as well. I took in the way the beast moved, trying to find any weakness. I could detect none. "What manner of fairy are you?" I asked, the words nearly swallowed up by the snow and trees and star-heavy sky. He didn't bother to turn around. He didn't bother to say anything at all. Fair enough. I'd killed his friend. After all. I tried again. "Do you have a name? Or anything to curse him by?" A huff of air that could have been a bitter laugh. Does it even matter to you, human?" I didn't answer. He might very well change his mind about sparing me, but perhaps I could escape before he decided to gut me. I would grab my family and we would stow away on a ship, sail far, far away. Perhaps I could try and kill him, regardless of the futility, and regardless of whether it constituted another unprovoked attack, just for being the one who came to claim my life, when these fairies valued ours so little. The mercenary had survived. Maybe I could too. Maybe. I opened my mouth again to ask him for his name, but a growl of annoyance rippled out of him. I didn't have the chance to struggle to fight back when a charged metallic tang stung my nose. Exhaustion slammed down upon me and blackness swallowed me whole. I awoke with a jolt atop the horse, secured by invisible bonds. The sun was already high. Magic, that's what the tang had been. That's what was keeping my limbs tucked tight, preventing me from going for my knife. I recognized the power deep in my bones, from some collective mortal memory and terror. How long had it kept me unconscious? How long had he kept me unconscious, rather than have to speak to me? Gritting my teeth, I might have demanded answers for him, might have shouted to where he still lumbered ahead, heedless of me. But then chirping birds flittered past me, a mild breeze kissed my face, and I spied a hedge-bordered metal gate ahead. My prison or my salvation, I couldn't decide which. 2 days. It took 2 days from my cottage to reach the wall and enter the southernmost border of Prythian. Had I been in an enchanted sleep for that long? Bastard. The gate swung open without porter or sentry, and the beast continued through. Whether I wanted to or not, my horse followed after him. The estate sprawled across rolling green land. I'd never seen anything like it. Even our former manor couldn't compare. What did I get? What? No. No. It's fine. It was veiled with roses and ivy, and patios and balconies and staircases and sprouting from its alabaster sides. The grounds were encased by woods, but stretched so far that I could barely see the distant line of the forest. So much color, so much sunlight and movement and texture. I could hardly drink it in fast enough. To paint, it would be useless. It would never do it justice. My awe must have subdued my fear had the place not been so wholly empty and silent. Even the garden, through which we walked, following a gravel path to the main doors of the house, seemed hushed and sleeping. Above the array of amethyst irises and pale snowdrops and butter yellow daffodils, swaying in the balmy breeze, a faint stench of metal tickled my nostrils. Of course it would be magic, because it was spring here. What wretched power did they possess to make their lands so different from ours, to control the seasons and weather as if they owned them? Sweat trickled down my spine as my layers of clothes turned suffocating. I rotated my wrists and shifted on the saddle. Whatever bonds had held me were gone. The ferry meandered on ahead, leaping nimbly up the grand marble staircase, which led to a giant oak doors in one mighty fluid moment. The doors swung open for him on silent hinges, and he prowled inside. He planned this entire arrival, no doubt, keeping me unconscious so I didn't know where I was, didn't know the way home, or what other deadly fairy territories might be lurking between me and the wall. I felt for my knife, but found only layers of frayed clothes. The thought of those claws pawing around through my cloak to find my knife made my mouth go dry. I shoved away the fury and the terror and the disgust as my horse came to a stop of her own accord at the foot of steps. The message was clear enough. The towering estate house seemed to be watching, waiting. I glanced over my shoulder towards the still open gates. If I were to bolt, it would have to be now. South. All I had to do was go south. I would eventually make it to the wall. If I didn't encounter anything before then. I tugged on the reins, but the mare remained stationary. Even as I dug my heels into her sides, I let a low, sharp hiss. Fine, on foot. My knees buckled as I hit the ground. Bits of light flashing in my vision. I gasped as the saddle and grasped the saddle and winced at the soreness and hunger raked my senses. Now, I had to go now. I had to make a move. But the world was still spinning and flashing. Only a fool would run with no food, no strength. I wouldn't get half a mile like this. I wouldn't get half a mile before he caught me and tore me to ribbons, as he promised. I took a long, shuddering breath. Food. Getting food, and then running at the next opportune moment. That it sounded like a solid plan. When I was steady enough to walk, I left the horse at the bottom of the stairs. Taking the steps one at a time, my breath tightened my chest. I passed through the open doors and into the shadows of the house. Inside, it was even more opulent. Black and white checkered marble stone at my feet, flowing countless doors, and a sweeping staircase. A long hall stretched ahead to the giant glass doors at the other end of the house. Through them I glimpsed a second garden, grander than the one out front. No sign of a dungeon, no shouts or pleas rising up from the hidden chambers below. No, just the low growl from a nearby room, so deep it rattled the vases, overflowing with fat clusters of hydrangea atop the scattered hall tables. As if in response, an open set of polished doors swung wider to my left, a command to follow. My shoulders shook as I rubbed my eyes. I'd known the High Fae had once built themselves palaces, temples around the world, buildings that my mortal ancestors had destroyed after the war out of spite. But I never considered how they might live today, the elegance and wealth they might possess. I never contemplated that fairies, these feral monsters, might own estates grander than any mortal dwelling. I tensed as I entered the room. A long table, longer than we'd ever possessed in our manor, filled most of the space. It was laden with food and wine, so much food, some of it wafting tendrils of steam that my mouth watered. At least it was familiar, and not some strange fey delicacy. Chicken, bread, peas, fish, asparagus, lamb. It could have been a feast at any mortal manor. Another surprise. The beast padded to the oversized chair at the head of the table. I lingered by the threshold, gazing at the food. All that hot, glorious food that I couldn't eat. It was the first rule that we were taught as children. Usually in songs or chants, if misfortune forced you to ever keep company with a fae, you never drank their wine, never ate their food. Ever. Not unless you wanted to end up enslaved to them, mind and soul. Not unless you wanted to wind up dragged back to Prythian. Well, the second part of that already happened, but I might stand a chance at avoiding the first. The beast plopped into the chair, wood groaning. In a flash of white light, turned into a golden-haired man. I stifled a cry and pushed myself across the panel, against the paneled wall beside the door, feeling for the molding of the threshold, trying not to gauge the distance between me and escape. This beast was not a man, nor a lesser fairy. He was one of the High Fae, one of their rolling nobility, beautiful, lethal, and merciless. He was young, or at least what I could see of his face seemed young. His nose, cheeks, and brows were covered by an exquisite golden mask embedded with emeralds shaped like whorls of leaves. Some absurd High Fae fashion, no doubt. It left only his eyes, looking the same as they had in his beast form, strong jaw, and mouth for me to see. The latter tightened in a thin line. "You should eat something," he said. Unlike the elegance of his mask, the dark green tunic he wore was rather plain, accented with a leather baldric across his broad chest. It was more for fighting than style. Even though he bore no weapons, I could detect not just one of the High Fae, but a warrior, too. I didn't even want to consider what might require him to wear a warrior's attire, and tried not to look too hard at the leather of the baldric gleaming in the sunlight, streaming in through the bank of the windows behind him. I hadn't seen a cloudless sky like that in months. He filled a glass of wine from an exquisitely cut crystal decanter and drank deeply, as if he needed it. I inched toward the door, my heart beating so fast I thought I'd vomit. The cool metal of the door's hinges bit into my fingers. If I moved fast, I'd be out of the house and sprinting for the gate in seconds. He was undoubtedly faster, but chucking some of those pretty pieces of hallway furniture in his bath might slow him down. Though his fey ears, with their delicate pointed arches, would pick up any whisper of movement from me. "Who are you?" I managed to say. His golden hair, so similar to the color of his formed pelt. Those giant claws undoubtedly still lurked just below the surface of his skin. "Sit," he said gruffly, waving a broad hand to encompass the table. "Eat." I ran through the chants in my head again and again. Not worth it. Easing my ravenous hunger was definitely not worth the risk of being enslaved to him, mind and soul. He let out a low growl. "Unless you'd rather faint?" "It's not safe for humans," I managed to say, offense be damned. He huffed a laugh, more feral than anything. "The food is fine for you to eat, human." Those green eyes pinned me to the spot, as if he could detect every muscle in my body that was priming to bolt. "Leave, if you want," he added with a flash of teeth. "I'm not your jailer. The gates are open. You can live anywhere in Prythian. And no doubt be eaten or tormented by a wretched fairy. But while every inch of this place was civilized and clean and beautiful, I had to get out. I had to get back. The promise to my mother, cold and vain as she was all I had. I made no move towards the food. "Fine," he said the word laced with a growl, and began serving himself. I didn't have to face the consequences of refusing him another time as someone strode past me, heading right for the head of the table. "Well," the stranger said. Another high fae, red-haired and finely dressed in a tunic of muted silver. He too wore a mask. He sketched a bow to the seated male. Okay, I don't think it's supposed to be sketched. He gave a bow. We're gonna say bow. To the seated male and then crossed his arms. Somehow, he hadn't spotted me where I was still pressed to the wall. "Well, what?" My captor cocked his head. Movement more than animal than human. "Is Andreas dead then?" A nod from my captor. Savior, whatever he was. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "How?" the stranger demanded. His knuckles white as he gripped the muscled. His knuckles tight as he gripped his muscled arms. "An ash arrow," said the other. His red-haired companion hissed. "The treaty's summons led me to the mortal. I gave her safe haven. A mortal girl, actually killed Andreas. Not a question so much as a venom-coated string of words." He glanced at the end of the table where my empty chair stood, and the summons found the girl responsible. The golden-masked one gave a low, bitter laugh and pointed at me. "The treaty's magic brought me right to her doorstep." The stranger whirled with a fluid grace, his mask bronze and fashioned after a fox's features, concealing all but the lower half of his face, along with most of what looked to be a wicked, slashing scar from his brow down to his jaw. It didn't hide the eye that was missing or the caved wooden golden orb that had replaced it, and moved as though he could use it. It fixated on me. Even from across the room I could see his remaining russet eye widen. He sniffed once, his lips curling in a bit of a to reveal a straight white teeth, and then he turned to the other fae. "You're joking. That scrawny thing brought down Andreas with a single ash arrow? Bastard. An absolute bastard. Kitty I didn't A pity I didn't have an arrow now, so I could shoot him instead. She admitted to it, the golden-haired one said tightly, tracing the rim of his goblet with a finger. A long, lethal claw slid out, scraping across the metal. I fought to keep my breathing steady, especially as he added, she didn't even try to deny it. The fox-masked fairy sank onto the edge of the table, a light catching in his long, fire-red hair. I could understand his mask, with that brutal scar, missing eye, but the other high face seemed fine. Perhaps he wore it out of solidarity. Maybe that explained the absurd fashion. Well, the red-haired one seethed. Now we're stuck with that thanks to your useless mercy, and you've ruined... I stepped forward. Only a step. I'm not sure what I was going to say, but being spoken about that way, I kept my mouth shut. But it was enough. Did you enjoy killing my friend, human? The red-haired one said. Did you hesitate? Or was the hatred in your heart riding you too hard to consider sparing him? It must have been so satisfying for a small mortal thing like you to take him down. The golden-haired one said nothing, but his jaw tightened. As they studied me, I reached for the knife that wasn't there. Anyway, the fox-masked one continued, facing his companion again with a sneer. He would likely laugh if I ever drew a weapon on him. Perhaps there's a way to... Lucian, my captor said quietly, the name echoing with a hint of a snarl. Behave. Lucian went rigid. But he hopped off the edge of the table and bowed deeply to me. Apologies, lady. Another joke at my expense. I'm Lucian, courtier and emissary. He gestured to me with a flourish. Your eyes are like the stars, and your hair is like burnished gold. He cocked his head, waiting for me to give him my name. But telling him anything about me, my family, where I came from, her name is Feyre, said the one in charge, the beast. He must have learned my name at my cottage. Those striking green eyes met mine again, and flicked to the door. Alice will take you to your room. You could use a bath and fresh clothes. I couldn't decide whether or not it was an insult or not. There was a firm hand at my elbow, and I flinched. A rotund, brown-haired woman with a simple brass bird mask tugged at my arm and inclined her head toward the opposite door behind us. Her white apron was crisp above her homespun brown dress. A servant. The masks had to be some sort of trend then. If they cared so much about their clothes, about what even their servants wore, maybe they were shallow enough for me to deceive, despite their master's warrior clothes. Still, they were high fae, and I had to be clever and quiet and bide my time until I could escape. So I let Alice lead me away. Room, not cell. A small relief, then. I'd barely made it a few steps before Lucian growled. That's the hand the cauldron dealt to us? She brought Andreas down? We never should have sent him out there. None of them should have been out there. It was a fool's mission. His growl more bitter than threatening. Could he shapeshift as well? Maybe we should just take a stand. Maybe it's time to say enough. Dump the girl somewhere. Kill her. I don't care. She's nothing but a burden here. She'd sooner put a knife in your back than talk to you or any of us. I kept my breathing calm, my spine locking, and... No, the other bit out. Not until we know for certain there is no other way will we make a move. As for this girl, she stays, unharmed. End of discussion. Her life in that hovel was hell enough. My cheeks heated. Even as I loosed a tight breath, I avoided looking at Alice. I could feel her eyes slide to me. A hovel. I suppose that's what our cottage was compared to this place. Then you've got your work cut out for you, old son, Lucienne said. I'm sure her life will be a fine replacement for Andreas's. Maybe she could even train with the others on the border. A snarl of irritation resounded through the air. The shining, spotless halls swallowed me up before I could hear more. Alice led me through the halls of gold and silver until we came upon a lavish bedroom on the second level. I'll admit I didn't fight that hard when Alice and two other servants, also masked, bathed me, cut my hair, and then plucked me until I felt like a chicken prepared for dinner. For all I know, I might very well be their next meal. It was only the high face promise to live out my days in Prythian instead of dying that kept me from being sick at the thought. While these fairies also looked human save for their ears, I never learned what the high fae called their servants, but I didn't dare to ask or speak to them at all. Not when just having their hands on me, having them so close was enough to make me focus solely on not trembling. Still, I took one look at the velvet turquoise dress Alice had placed on the bed and wrapped my white dressing gown tightly around me, sinking into a chair and pleading for my old clothes to be returned. Alice refused, and when I begged again, trying my best not to sound pathetic and sad and pitiful, she stormed out. I hadn't worn a dress in years. I wasn't about to start, not when my escape was my main priority. I wouldn't be able to move freely in a gown. Bundled in my robe, I waited for minute after minute, the chattering of small birds in the garden. Beyond the windows, the only sounds, no screaming, no clashing of weapons, no hinting of slaughter or torture. The bedroom was larger than our entire cottage. Its windows were a pale green, delicately sketched with patterns of gold. The moldings were gold as well. I might have thought it tacky had the ivory furniture and rugs not complemented it so well. The gigantic bed was of similar color scheme, and the curtains that hung from the towering headboard drifted in the faint breeze from the open windows. My dressing gown was of the finest silk, edged with lace, simple and exquisite, enough that I ran a finger along the lapels. A few more stories I'd heard had been wrong, or 500 years of separation had muddled them. Yes, I was still prey, still born weak, useless compared to them. But this place was peaceful, calm, unless that was an illusion too, and the loophole of the treaty was a lie, a trick for me to set me at ease before they destroyed me. The high fae liked to play with their food. The door creaked and Alice returned a bundle of clothing in her hands. She lifted a sodden grayish shirt. "You want to wear this?" I gasped at the holes in the sides of the sleeve. It fell apart the moment the laundress put it in the water. She held up a few scraps of brown. "Here's what's left of your pants." I clamped down on the curse building in my chest. She might be a servant, but she could easily kill me too. "Will you wear the dress now?" she demanded. I knew I should get up. Should agree, but I slumped further in my seat. Alice stared down at me a moment before leaving again. She returned it with trousers and tunic that fit me well, both of them rich with color. A bit fancy, but I didn't complain as I donned the white short, nor when I buttoned the deep blue tunic and ran my hands over the scratchy golden thread embroidered on the lapels. It must have cost a fortune itself, and it tugged at the useless part of my mind that admired lovingly and strange and colorful things. I was too young to remember much before my father's downfall. He'd tolerated me enough to allow me to loiter about his offices, and sometimes even explained various goods and their worth, details of which I'd long since forgotten. My time in his offices, full of scents and of exquisite spices and music of foreign tongues, made up the majority of my few happy memories. I didn't need to know the worth of everything in this room to understand that the emerald of the curtains alone, silk with golden velvet, would have fed us for a lifetime. A chill scuttered down my spine. It had been days since I'd left. The venison would be running low already. Alice herded me into a low back chair before a darkened fireplace, and I didn't fight as she ran a comb through my hair and began braiding it. "You're hardly more than skin and bones," she said, her fingers luxurious against my scalp. "Winter does that to poor mortals," I said, fighting to keep the sharpness from my tone. She huffed a laugh. "If you're wise, you'll keep your mouth shut and your ears open. It'll do you more good here than a loose tongue. And keep your wits about you. Even your senses will try and betray you here." I tried not to cringe at the warning. Alice led on. "Some folk are bound to be upset about Andreas. Yet if you ask me, Andreas was a good sentinel, but he knew what he would face when he crossed the wall. Knew he would likely find trouble, and others understand the terms of the treaty too, even if they might resent your presence here, thanks to the mercy of our master. So keep your head down, and none of them will bother you. Though Lucien, he could do with someone snapping at him if you have enough courage for it. I didn't, but when I went to ask more about whom I should try and avoid, she had already finished with my hair and opened the door to the hall." And that is where we're going to call the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we come back next time, we will continue with Chapter 7. See you later.